Hey everyone, this is Brandon Rush. Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Agent Investor. The goal of The Agent Investor is to help investors make informed decisions regarding multifamily, commercial property, and other investment assets through conversations with real estate professionals, affiliates, and other. Today we have a good friend of mine, Stephanie Cabral. Steph is a local investor here in Central Connecticut. To plug her, she actually was the first meetup I went to when I started investing almost 3 years ago now. So I've known Steph for almost 3 years now, I guess. We'll jump right into it. I'm going to let Steph take over. Steph, thank you so much for joining us. And how are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Absolutely. Just so everyone knows, like I said, Steph is a local investor here. So we're going to talk a few things with Steph today. Steph is a big self-manager. She's a professional. She's very streamlined with it. And I think we're going to have a lot to learn from her today about the topic of self-managing. I've talked before with property managers and that side, but this is going to be more toward the self-managing side, how you can do it effectively through systems and technology. So the first thing we'll jump into is with the questions is, with Steph, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what you're doing, what you're working on.
Yeah, thanks. So, like you said, I'm based in Connecticut. I am a full-time landlord. I am a recovering attorney, actually. So, I practiced probate law for about 10 years and then transitioned about 3.5 years ago full-time into real estate. So, landlording is my bread and butter. I have 19 units, including 4 midterm rentals. And I've done a handful of flips, but really being, buy and hold landlord, doing the equity recapture strategy of BRRRR has allowed me to grow and have financial independence and kind of step away from that 9 to 5, which is fantastic. But I do self-manage with the help of one virtual assistant and a lot of systems and technology and processes. So that's been a really tremendous transition for me. And I always like to tell people that the best benefit of leaving my 9 to 5 has really been that I can now take very long vacations and still collect rental income, and which is my main source of income. So I can do that whether I'm here or in the Caribbean.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. So what we're going to do before we get into the property management or the self-management aspect of what you do, let's talk about how you built those 19 units over the course of these years. Tell us quickly about the first one and then how you scaled up to your 19 units up until now.
Yeah, the first one was so important. I mean, at the time, even though I was an attorney, I knew pretty quickly I didn't want to be an attorney. So we made some compromises at the firm. I was not making what I really wanted to make. So I was very limited as far as what I could buy. I started to look at condos, I started to look at single families. I just couldn't afford my taste, right? So I got really lucky. I had an agent who was helping me and he suggested I buy a duplex. My mom had also suggested I buy a duplex. I just wasn't in a place to hear her at the time. So an agent put it out there. I started to run some numbers and the numbers actually worked way better when someone else is contributing to your mortgage. So I started searching pretty obsessively for about a year. I moved back home and was looking and looking. I actually found the deal that I ended up buying. It was a condemned duplex in a great part of a great town. So, kind of this unicorn that everybody's looking for, right? I
Yeah.
made an offer on it. They laughed because the offer that I made sense to me. It didn't make sense to them. And it also wasn't competitive with their asking price, but that's what I could afford.
Yeah.
So I made the offer, they laughed, came back a couple months later. I saw they actually didn't come back at me, but I was still tracking it. I saw they made a major price jump and I made the offer. So it was the same offer that I had made, 6 months prior. They accepted it this time and I used the 203K loan to buy and rehab that property. So that property has been such a darling for me. Not very many people can say one of their best deals was their first deal, but this one has really just opened the world to me because I had a lot of equity from day one. I was able to build that in. I saw the equity recapture strategy and refinance from my first transaction. I was able to put a HELOC on it when I still lived there. And then when I moved out, I transitioned, and now both of those units are midterm rentals. And I remember somebody local in the market had told me, like, you'll never get more than $1,200 a month for those units. But I had really strong vision in that. And now both sides are getting 2,400. So yeah, it's a pretty beautifully nasty upgrade. So I've been really loving that property. So that was my first one. I honestly didn't know that what I was doing was investing. All I knew at that time was that I was living really cheap and that somebody else was paying my mortgage. And then I slowly figured out when I had my first vacancy that, oh, when you have to pay your own mortgage, that's no fun. And then I, of course, go through the tenant turn process, and I eventually bought a second property and kind of the same thing. Well, if this tenant's paying my mortgage here, maybe another tenant could pay another mortgage. So I kind of fell into investing, and then all of a sudden I found Bigger Pockets, which has been a tremendous resource of connection and information. And then I was like, "Oh, I'm actually investing. This is great." So then it got more intentional, and
Absolutely.
I started to deploy that equity recapture BRRRR strategy over and over. So I was buying just more single family homes, maybe one a year, then two a year when I was able to, and just started to expand into duplexes. And then around 2021, when the market really went crazy, I had enough assets that I could really play with repositioning them in a way that made sense.
Yeah.
So I refinanced a bunch, pulled a lot of cash out, but my cash flow didn't change because my interest rates went way down. So my interest rates went way down. And then I had a bunch of cash, and I was also able to sell my lowest performing assets and take those funds and do 1031. So my low performing single families went into two triplexes that are very high performing. So my cash flow just exploded at that point, really gave me the ability, the comfort of stepping out of my job. So, I mean, I've done everything from the 203K, which I mentioned, private loans, hard money, historic preservation grants, the reverse 1031. I'm trying to think what else I've done. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's it, but I feel like that's a good array right there.
Absolutely. More than most. So we ran the gamut in terms of all of the methods, not all, but a lot of the methods that people are trying to do. So you had a home run right from the start with your duplex and being able to do a 2 or 3K loan and then refinancing and getting a HELOC. Like that's all the stuff they talk about, and you're able to do all in one property. One thing I'm big on telling investors about is it shows that everybody's trying to scale super fast, but obviously your portfolio is not like 1,000 units, but still focusing on one property and also squeezing the most out you can out of that property in every way is still much better than picking up 3 or 4 properties at a time and then trying to figure it out and struggle and get along those 3 or 4 properties. So yeah, congrats on doing all that, and definitely inspirational. So
Thank you.
all right, so let's keep it moving. So another question: when you first started out managing properties, was there a learning curve, or were you a natural? Like, how did that experience go?
Uh, Sadly, I was not a natural. So I think a lot of people that house hack are almost disadvantaged because it's so easy to manage a property that you live in, right? So I was doing all of the big no-nos. I was having rent just collected at my door, or I'd walk over and say hi, and we'd exchange. And then I just, even like diplomacy and tact and how to manage others, I had never managed anybody before.
Mm,
So I had to learn everything. As I started to grow in my portfolio, I didn't have any systems in place, and I started to get really frustrated with the repetitive tasks and like looking information back up over and over. Or I remember really the task that was kind of the gateway task into virtual assistants for me was adding water bills to the tenants' invoices. So here in Connecticut, we can't move water bills out of the owner's names and put them into the tenants. So I would receive the water bills from the water company for my single families and then have to upload them, add the fee to my tenants' invoices once I started doing rent collection or if I was emailing them. And then it got really annoying because I had to do it every month.
yes.
And I learned something really important about me is that I have very high standards for the way that I treat people, the way people view me, my processes, just I have high standards in general. But I do not like to do anything twice. And so I have a little bit of laziness, and I consider that now to be a superpower of mine. And I'm really glad that I have it. Similar to the way I was really glad I couldn't afford to buy a single family, and it ended up being so much better. I bought a duplex, and look at where the world took me, right?
Absolutely.
But I'm very lazy, and I'm not good with details when I have to do them over and over. So I hired a virtual assistant to help me just with that one task. And then I was like, this is great. That task is happening whether I'm on the beach or whether I'm at work, because I was still working at the time. And then I started to really, as the portfolio grew, I was like, if I could do that with one task, what if I could do that with a lot of tasks? And what if I could do it with technology? So, like, adding the rent collection platform was my first automation, my first step into automation that I think is absolutely something that every investor should be looking at, is having a professional rent collection platform. And then starting to document the process of when you've decided what your best practices are for something like, especially big items that maybe you only do once a year or once every couple years, right? So if you've got one property and you're doing a tenant turn every 4 or 5 years, you're going to have to relearn that process unless you've documented what were the best practices. So that's when I started. As the portfolio grew, I actually was able to document down what I do, how I do it, what my notes and resources are to make that process predictable and repeatable. So I started to build unknowingly, again, standard operating procedures, the SOP. And that document now serves as a playbook for all of my guidelines, policies, communication standards, has links to templates. It's really my playbook for my business. And I've been able to bring on my virtual assistant who now works for me 20 hours a week, and she just follows that playbook, which is wonderful.
Yeah, no,
So it
absolutely.
was definitely a learning curve, I think is the short answer to your question. But, if you start off buying a property out of state, I think you're going to figure out your processes way faster than someone who it's easy to manage locally. And so I think that when you're house hacking, you have to keep in mind, if you just want this one property, then maybe those policies that you're doing and your procedures that you're doing, maybe that's fine. Maybe that's enough. But if you want to scale, what you're doing to manage one is not sustainable. And you're going to have to deconstruct and figure out retroactively, which is what I did. And it was really, really hard, especially with like taxes and preparation and, just keeping your books current. All of that is something you want to implement policies at the beginning that allow you to scale seamlessly.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I remember my first rental and just everything, like you said, from rent collection to communication with tenants to preparing for the snow time and what to do then and all of this and that and just all the stuff. If you do not systemize it, it's become such a burden. Even with one property, I was living in a 3-family for my first one. I realized like right away, this is extremely annoying that we're doing this again. And how come we did not like document this from the last time? So agreed 110% with what you said. And even if it's just typing in, I literally just started with a Google Doc and started typing things that happened and said, all right, when June 1st comes, this is going to be happening. Start planning for September for whatever this is. And it started that simply, but I'm sure your systems are much more complex than that. But even that basic level of preparing helped me significantly as we bought more units, over the years. But cool. No, thank you so much for that. Let's see what we got. So you started, and correct me, you started a venture or company called the Leand Landlord, and you have a program now called the Landlord Like A Pro. So tell us more about it.
Yeah, so you're totally right. The Leand Landlord is designed to make better landlords, right? So the whole point is that I've been able to enjoy time freedom. I've been able to enjoy control and transparency over my portfolio, serve my tenants really well, but also do it while saving a lot of money through not farming out property management. And I've been able to do it through using systems and technology. So I want to give that same gift of long vacations, control and transparency, serve your tenants well, but not be doing it, not be recreating the wheel all the time. I want to give that same gift to other landlords. So Landlord Like a Pro is the first product of the Leand Landlord, and it's catered to the long-term rental space. So for self-managing landlords that need to improve their operations, so that's their systems, their technology, their policies and procedures, all of the tweaks of not what do you do to self-manage, but how do you do those things very well, optimally, efficiently, cost effectively, repeatably, and predictably, right? So that is the function of the Leand Landlord, and specifically with Landlord Like a Pro for those long-term rentals. So it's a guide for self-managing landlords, and we're really looking at building operations from the ground up. So the guide is a multimedia bundle. It's like all my checklists and templates and video instructions. It's a blank SOP that allows you to build it out, along with just also like tips and tricks on how to 10x all of it. So how do you make an SOP that caters to someone who reads or someone that is a visual learner? Or how do you include all those links to instructions? And how do you do all that for free, right? Because the whole point is you're not trying to replace the cost of property management with vendor services. So how do you do it in a way that's cost effective? And it honestly changed my life. And I will say that having these processes in flowchart form and in spreadsheet form and in written form, it caters to everybody.
Got it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what we'll do towards the end of this, we'll talk about how people can get access to that program. But no, thank you so much for that. Landlord Like a Pro
Yeah.
definitely would have been super helpful for me when I first started. I think for not anyone, like everyone, when you first start, it would be a great program to get into because it's almost like having a mentor in the case or having some kind of guide versus you just stumbling to figure it out and saving lots of money and time by just doing it day one versus struggling through the inefficiencies and the headaches of self-managing that you just didn't know. So definitely recommend people take a look at this and look into it once you pick up your first property. Even if you have properties already, look into it because
Oh,
a lot of us still,
definitely.
they have people that are, I know people that are 70 years old and they're still self-managing completely ineffectively and they still collect rent. They own like 20 units, 50 units, and they still go door to door and do all this weird stuff.
I mean, they've got keys that they're using. And what if you arrive at a property and you don't have the key with you? So, like, how do you avoid all of those little inefficiencies? There are a ton of resources out there. I want to kind of differentiate between those resources for self-managing landlords that are like, make sure you vet your tenant, make sure you list your property, make sure, like there's a lot of guides on there about what to do.
Yeah.
There's not that many guides on how to do it, how to use the templates that are in Zillow. It's all of those little tweaks. And so I liken it to baseball, right? So you might be able to tell the batter, like, go up, take the bat, swing the bat at the ball, go run around the bases, right? Like that's kind of what's out there for landlords. But this is how to hold the bat, which bat to choose, how to put your body into the swing so that your mechanics make the best swing and best contact with the ball that you can make. So I hope that that kind of clarifies the difference. I mean, I do mention you should screen your tenants, but this is more like, here's a checklist to make sure you don't forget something, right? And here's the questions that you want to ask, and here's why, right? So it's really on the specifics of how do you perform those steps. And then there's a lot of pieces in there about you're going to have a different procedure than I do for certain things because maybe we service different types of tenants or different asset classes or our team looks different. And so it's very much about empowering you to make decisions that are best practices for you and how to document them well.
Got it. And it sounds like, if anything, it can create a framework that may be different, like you said, beyond investors, but it still gives a framework on maybe where to start and how to do things. And maybe you could do it your way slightly, but it's not this fixed way of doing it, but it gives you kind of a path to go and then you can go from there afterwards.
Definitely. And actually, one more thing on that before I know you want to move on, but one more thing on that is my favorite part about Landlord Like a Pro is that there's a 6-week action oriented boot camp that tells you, like, week 1, you're laying the foundation, you're mimicking an office environment digitally so you can access it remotely, you can share with teams. So it's got suggestions on the tech stack that you should use throughout, but they're suggestions. It's, week 1, here's what I recommend, but you're going to need to make decisions for yourself. So here's the steps for week 1. Week 2, we're talking about incorporating tech into the biggest piece of your business. For me, that's the rent collection. Week 3, so you go through week by week and it tells you exactly what steps to take and exactly the technology and the instructions and all the pro tips to make sure you don't make big mistakes with those technologies, because some of that is just learned by experience, but it's the action oriented step by step that I really love, because you can have all the information in the world, but if you don't have a plan for implementation, you might implement something on a rocky foundation. You want to do it on something that's solid. So you need to build from the ground up. And that's what the boot camp allows you to do.
Got it. Absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you. So next one, we look at the pros and cons of self-managing over using a PM. What are some of the pros and cons basically of self-managing, you would say?
Yeah. So, I mean, the pros, obviously, you save money. You get to have control over the way that your tenants are serviced, the tone of voice that's used. your maintenance, I guess, how quickly you address your work orders.
Mm.
You have transparency, you have control. All of those things are very important for me. There are definitely some cons, and I think there are perceived cons and there are real cons, right? So some of the perceived cons are going to be things like you're going to have calls in the middle of the night, or you're always on call, and things like, the typical version of what a mom and pop landlord are. You're going to have questions that come up that you don't know how to answer, right? And some of those are true and some of those can be mitigated. So I have a third party maintenance coordination team that handles all my maintenance requests. They handle intake with clients, damage mitigation, and then they dispatch my vendors, right? So like I don't ever get calls. I will get like an escalated call if, hey, we need to authorize an expense over the $300. That's your, limit that you've indicated. So they just follow my policies and they kind of run their own thing, including tenant follow-up and vendor follow-up. So you can mitigate a lot of these perceived damages. Same thing. I mean, even if you are not the property manager, let's say you've hired a property manager, you're still a decision maker in your own portfolio. And so the buck still stops with you. There are still going to be instances that you're called in and you need to figure out what to do. Certainly, it happens more often when you are also the property manager, but you can put more stopgaps into place. And again, even with boundaries around communication. So your tenants and vendors should have, and your VA should have really strict guidelines on how to and when to communicate with you, right? So that you're not getting calls all the time. And so we do that a number of ways. One, with instructions, two, with dedicated portals, and three, using a Google Voice number that we can screen. And so we're not taking a call if we're not in a position to speak informatively about it. I think the real con of self-managing is that you are still overseeing. So that takes time. And I think that is a trade-off that you have to make the analysis for yourself, whether that trade-off of time is worth it for those other benefits of transparency, control, and a huge cost savings. And again, the time, we mitigate that as well by having reports that come through every month, through maintenance request reports, through financial reports. So we can track to see whether a property has all of a sudden spike in a water bill, or, if something's not performing well. And we do annual rent audits. So like all of these, we try to preemptively put into place so that we don't do very much reactively, because that is the thing that is the most annoying. And it was maintenance requests for a while, right? You're just responding to them. So once you can outsource that piece, like you really are mostly operating in a preemptive way. Even move outs, like you can set it up so that you have such advanced notice that it's a very comfortable tenant term. So all of these are just, think about the ways that self-managing is annoying and how do you mitigate them. That's kind of what the Leand Landlord and Landlord Like a Pro is all about, is trying to manage with very little, just inconvenience, but still great service.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that. All right, so we're starting to wrap up here. So I have it's not really a question, but just small plug. So again, like I said at the beginning, I met Steph through her meetup years ago, and Steph still runs that meetup today, which I still attend. And just want to give you a small plug. Tell us about your meetup.
Yeah, so the meetup's the Greater Hartford REI, Real Estate Investors Association meeting. We meet the second Tuesday of every month at Illicit Brewery in Manchester, 6:30 to basically whenever we close it down. It's a great spot. We don't do any education, so we don't bring in speakers. It's all networking. It's a very open, inclusive group, everywhere from like new investors to hundreds of units out of state, right? We've got a core group that comes pretty much all the time, and it's open to whoever comes, wants to check it out, bring friends. It's really become amazing. We have pretty consistently between 30 to 50 people that show up. That when I took it over, I think was 2016. So I'd only been investing for maybe a year and a half. I think at that point I had 3 units, and I took it over from somebody else. He had a meeting that would get like anywhere from 8 to 12 people, which I absolutely adored. All of the like the intimate conversations that happen in a small group.
Yes.
And it's just grown over time. People like to be in the networking circle, and these people become your friends. They don't teach this in school. You need to have access to other people that you trust, that you know are doing deals, that you can ask questions to, that you can bounce ideas off of, right? So this is really where you go and build your intentional circle of friends that help you level up. So
Absolutely.
please, if you're thinking about coming, you are welcome to. If you show up on the holiday party, which is December, this is my favorite one. If you've bought your first deal that year, I buy a drink for everyone that bought their first deal. So, and we give a little cheers. It's a fun little tradition.
Absolutely, absolutely. Cool. So outside of your real estate, when you're not running Landlord Like a Pro and, taking care of your properties, what are some of the things you like to do? What are your hobbies?
So we just put the boat in the water. So I got my certificate a couple years ago. So I've been really enjoying driving the boat and biking around, gardening, or you'll find me in the Caribbean if it's the winter. So
Nice.
just try to stay busy and stay active.
Absolutely. Any plans for any real estate in the Caribbean or out of the country at some point?
I have been making offers. They have not been accepted yet, but just building the momentum. But yeah, I think that would be absolutely a dream.
Absolutely.
No plans, just hopes at this point.
It's all good. So how can people find you or get a hold of you?
Yeah. So you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. They're both Leand Landlord is the handle for each of them. And then you can also find me on my personal Facebook page, Stephanie Cabral. And then I think the Instagram personal handle is Stephanie Sunrise. So
Got it.
follow me. I try to drop a lot of information on, what Landlord Like a Pro has, good tips. And it's always good to have more followers and more community to contribute.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, cool. Thank you. Before we depart, any final words for the audience before we take off?
Yeah, creating passive income is an active job. So you can't start by thinking that you're going to just buy your first property and be totally hands off. It's going to take some active work. Buying your first property takes a lot of work. Getting your processes in place takes a lot of work, but you front load that work and you enjoy the fruits of all that labor. So this is my encouragement to you. Like, do not give up. If you're stuck, if you're still looking, know that it took me over a year to buy my first deal, 2 years to buy my second deal, and then they kind of snowball after that. So keep working and do not wait too long to put your policies and procedures and focus on your operations, because it will hurt a lot more if you wait.
It will be very painful. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So with that said, thank you, Stephanie, so much for joining us today. And to our audience, thank you once again for joining us for another episode of The Agent Investor. I want to wish you all the best in your health and happiness. Until next time, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Absolutely.